Hello, this is Mark Sobowitz with the Clarion Voice. Today we are pleased to have a brother in Christ, Chris Hurd, with us. Thank you for being with us, Chris. Thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. And we've talked before about things that you're studying. Some of which is in the Old Testament and other things. So, what exactly are you studying?
So there's kind of two things that I'm focusing on right now. One of it is, like you said, the Old Testament, and kind of studying the parallels between the Bible and science. And the other one that I'm kind of studying is the validity of the Bible. I kind of just want to understand where we get our confidence in the scriptures and why it is we trust what it says.
Okay, so is there a method that you're using, in this study that you're doing?
Yeah, so I do have the typical approach, which is the Bible is true. You assume the Bible is true for everything, and so I take that and I apply it to the different areas of science. Assuming that the Bible is true, what does this mean for this part of science, and so I have that approach. And then I have the sort of devil's advocate approach. If you're coming from the mind of, say, an atheist or an agnostic, someone who doesn't necessarily believe the Bible, I kind of take that approach as well and try to figure out, okay, how do we justify what we see in the Bible against what we see in the world in a way that is convincing to someone who may not have that perspective that the Bible is true.
Okay. So what have you found so far in your studying? Is there anything that sort of stands out that maybe you didn't know about in the past?
Well, sure. There's plenty. There's a lot of, dispute about the historicity of the Bible, which I actually didn't know when I was younger. So I'm really digging into that and trying to figure out more about it, and it's really been interesting. I think a lot of the validity of the Bible comes from the fulfillment of prophecy, which is really interesting. Mm-hmm. But there's been plenty of other things, like different parts of science that line up with the Bible in ways that I've never expected. And of course, we don't exactly know how the universe works exactly. We only think we know. Same thing about the Bible. It's our interpretation of the Bible. And so there may be parts of it that we think mean one thing, and 100 years from now, they actually mean something different. So
okay, it's
just been a slow unveiling of how little I know.
Well, is science, in studying that part of it, is science trying to disprove the validity of the Bible, and how have you found that to be?
I think a lot of modern scientists, especially these days, they try to disprove God. I don't think science itself has a comment on the issue of God. If going back to the philosophy of science, it's kind of a separate question. Science is the study of the natural world through observation, and you can't test or observe God consistently. And so science really doesn't have a comment on proving God or seeking to find, but you could infer God from the science. That's the thing that's kind of interesting. You can see science and take that to infer God in certain things. Like, okay, I see this thing, and you can assume it's one thing, a new hypothesis in science. Or you can say, okay, let's take that and create a hypothesis around God. And obviously you can't really test it fully, but right. It's just interesting that a lot of modern scientists tend to write off God as a possibility immediately, and so they never even get to that idea. And so I think the goal of science isn't really to disprove God, but to seek out the truth via rigorous observation.
Okay, how would you approach somebody who was tending to marginalize, God, and God's existence? I mean, whether they be, atheist or not, I know in an apologetic way, you would be trying to do that, but how would you go about doing that for somebody that maybe didn't know, and you wanted to show them, okay, God does exist in this way?
Well, the approach that I typically take is I don't try to prove God through the science. It is you try to be objective when you're talking to someone who tries to write off God. And First Peter, I think it's 3:15, or I think it's First Peter 3:15 says to be prepared to always give an answer. Always
Right.
have a reason for the hope that you have. And so I think it's our job as Christians to study these things and really be prepared to reason with people and give them a reason for your faith. And obviously we can't, like I said, we can't prove God through science. That's not the purpose of science. But you could take science to infer God and show them, this is why I believe God exists, and this is why I believe you need Jesus in your life. And I think there's a lot to it that I think people bring a lot to the table. They have a lot of previous experience. They went to school. They heard in biology class that evolution is true. They have all these different things that they've either assumed or they've been taught throughout the years. And you kind of have to break past all those things. A lot of those things are assumptions. There are a lot of things that are in science that are based off assumption. There are a lot of things that once you get to a certain point, there's a lot of truth in science. But once you get to a certain point, you either take the science and point it away from God, saying, no, that disproves God. And a lot of that comes from Christians, by the way. Christians
Really?
inferring or assuming that the science points away from God. And I think that's because we think that we interpret the Bible a certain way. And because we interpret it a certain way, we say the science doesn't point to that. So we therefore think that this is going against the Bible. And therefore, this is incorrect science. And I think that does Christians a lot of injustice.
That's interesting, but I mean, you would use the word, the basis of the word to prove your hypothesis, whatever it happens to be. Then,
yeah, I think it's valid to take the Bible as long as we can, in some way, infer for its truth. If you assume the truth of the Bible, like in the perspective that I was talking about first, then you can take that truth within the Bible and see how it fits in with the science. And that's kind of been my study. Or rather, how the science fits in with the Bible. It's interesting when you take that perspective, how much of the science makes more sense. Because you can actually, I've actually taken some things in the past where the science hadn't really been, it hadn't gotten to that point yet. And I've made some predictions like, I bet this is going to turn out to be this. And 10 years down the road, turns out that's what the science discovered. And so it's really interesting when you take the Bible's perspective on things, apply it to science, or try to see how the science would work with that and see what you come up with.
I see.
Yeah.
So what made you start studying, all of this, what led you to try and get more information?
Yeah. So when I was a young Christian, I grew up a Christian. My parents were Christian. I was raised in the First Assembly of God Church in Lancaster. And I believe my faith at that time of my life was very centered around what was told by my parents. Really kind of the nature and nurture thing. I grew up in a Christian family. I was nurtured within a Christian household, and just I was raised that way. And so for me, Christian life was just the only life I really knew. And so when I reached towards the end of high school, I encountered a lot of very trying times. And when I went off to college, I was on my own. And so I kind of, at that point, was kind of seeking my own way. Like, okay, if I am going to live a Christian life, I need to have a reason for it, you know? And during that time, my faith was really tried because I didn't really have a foundation for the reason for my faith. It was just, this is what my parents did. This is how I was raised. And there were certain things that my dad specifically tried to do where he like brought home videos like The Privileged Planet was one of them, which talks about the cosmology of the Bible and kind of trying to prove why God is just statistically true or statistically the more reasonable option. It's kind of the intelligent design argument. So I was really brought up under that. And the interesting part is a lot of the arguments that were brought up in a lot of those videos, a lot of the arguments that were brought up under the intelligent design theory at the time, a lot of those were proved true or false. And so that really shook my faith at the time. I was like, okay, so a lot of these arguments that the Christians had at the time, now obviously today the intelligent design argument has been strengthened. They've found a lot more evidence and there's a lot more solidified argument around that. But at the time I was like, well, the interpretation of this, it was incorrect. And I really don't know what to base my faith on at the time. So I was like, I didn't know what to think. I was very agnostic at that point. But fortunately I stayed within the church with a lot of guidance from my parents, and really God really held on to me at that time. It was a very shaky time for me. But I think once I grew stronger in my experiential faith, I would call it, I really experienced God during that time. It wasn't based in any sort of foundation of reason or anything like that. It was really experiential. But once I got that solid, I was like, I don't ever want to doubt God again. And I don't think I would, but I really want to solidify this part of my life because I don't want my kids or anybody that I talk to doubt in this manner either. You know, we are constantly being barraged with all these things. When you go to college, you're constantly being challenged in your faith. A lot of professors have their own idea of how the universe works, and a lot of them don't separate that from what they teach. And so it's kind of the unfortunate reality of our school system these days, where you're basically being fed an ideology that is not unbiased. It does have a religion to it. I call it a religion because it is somewhat faith-based. You know, you gotta, science is based in an element of faith. You can only study to a certain point. We have our understanding to a certain point, and statistically we understand certain things, but there's a lot that we don't understand, and that's what a hypothesis is. It's a statement of faith that you try to eventually develop into a theory.
Okay, so what is the biggest takeaway so far in what you've studied that you have about all this information?
I would say that my biggest takeaway is that for me personally, God is like, think of a puzzle box.
Okay.
There's a prize inside, and you're trying to figure out how to unlock the box. For me, that's kind of what I'm seeing is I feel like God has presented this puzzle box to me, and there's a bunch of different puzzle boxes out there. You know, for me, it's very specific to me. I feel like the prize that's inside is God is trying to reveal himself to me in a deeper manner, in a deeper way. And the challenge of the puzzle is kind of bringing me closer to him. Just like when you when you solve a certain part of the puzzle, it brings you closer to opening the box. And so that's I think, like I said, there's a bunch of different puzzle boxes out there. Everybody needs to find their own. There's a puzzle box in biology. There's a puzzle box in physics. There's a puzzle box in chemistry. Just God reveals himself in different ways to different people. And it may not necessarily be in science. It may be the arts. It may be philosophy. It may be everyday experience, you know. It may be some person that you encounter down the street. But I think we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to the people that we reach out to. And ultimately, we owe it to God to seek him out and really find out more about him. I think it's the greatest expression of love to try and get to know him more.
Thank you, Chris, very much. That's a clarion voice. And if you like this video, share it with someone and like and subscribe. And we want to thank Chris for being here today. And until next time, this is Mark Sobowitz with a clarion voice.